Welcome to the Orthodontics and Interview Podcast, where Farooq brings you closer to the experts in orthodontics so we can hear their story and learn from their experiences. With your host, Farooq Ahmed.
Welcome to this episode of Orthodontics in Interview. It's my absolute pleasure to bring to you Adith Venugopal. Adith is a clinician, he's an academic, he's an editor, he is really an authority within the field of orthodontics. So let me tell you more about today's guest. So Adith is a consultant orthodontist and assistant professor, and he's based out of the University of Puthisastra from Cambodia. Adith is also an adjunctive professor at Savitha Dental College, and that's in Chennai, India. Adith has achieved numerous things in his career. He did his BDS from India, he achieved his master's in clinical orthodontics from Philippines, and his PhD in South Korea. Adith is also currently the youngest fellow of the International College of Dentists and also holds a fellowship with the Pierre Fauchard Academy. Adith, welcome to Orthodontics in Summary podcast.
Thank you so much, Farooq, for the generous introduction. I'm more than honored to be here with you.
My absolute pleasure to have you on board. Now, Adith is also the co-editor of an international journal in orthodontics, which is a German journal, so bear with me as I try to pronounce it, and it's called Kieferorthopaedie. Am I anywhere close at all there, Adith?
But yeah, sounds good.
And he's a co-editor there with Bjorn Ludwig, and also Jay Bowman has been involved as well. So it's a fantastic achievement. So Adith, the first question that brings me to is your achievements that you've had in such a short space of time. You've achieved assistant professorship, multiple publications. I mean, you've had 13 over the last year, which is a phenomenal output to have. Beyond that, you now sit alongside the experts in orthodontics with your titles and also your editorship. So how have you managed to achieve all of these things in such a short time frame of time compared to the other people we've seen in orthodontics, the names such as Kevin O'Brien, where it's been decades upon decades to them to achieve what you have?
Thank you so much, Farooq, for the question, and thank you for putting me besides those big names. I can assure you I'm nothing compared to them. But then, of course, what I have had to my side is social media and the internet. And I think I have made full use of it. It's pretty easy to convey a message in the form of cases or in terms of what you feel through the internet or through social media, which the other big guns didn't have at that particular point. They used to do that through journals, through articles in peer-reviewed journals, and it was accessible only to the elite, the premiers of orthodontics. But now, with internet, we have access to the global orthodontists throughout the world, starting from the postgraduates to the mid-level to the top end. And I think that's what's helped me. And moreover, yes, I'm not going to take away anything from clinical mastery. Your basics need to be very strong. And I think orthodontics after that is something that you can experiment with once your basics are strong. And I'm glad that I could put my point across to the entirety of the orthodontic field.
And it's amazing, and I do thank you for it. I'm sure it takes an incredible quantity of time. But you're absolutely right, that circulation of ideas is present through those social media platforms. And don't get me wrong, it has its negatives. Bad ideas can come across as well. But you very much stand as a leading light with kind of positivity and also kind of keeping those hallmark orthodontic ideas still there. It's not so out there that it's no longer imbibing the principles that we have. So it's really interesting to get your thoughts as to how it's happened. On that same topic, multitude of your posts relate to the use of temporary anchorage devices. What's led you to have an interest in them?
You see, Farooq, anchorage is critical in the area that I practice in. We have severe malocclusions in this part of the world. And most malocclusions are usually coupled with bimaxillary protrusions and all those sort of things. So primarily, I cannot afford to lose that premolar space in most of the conditions. And secondly, oral hygiene is really poor in youngsters in this area. So by the time they reach adulthood, most of the molars are missing. I mean, you'd be surprised to know that about 70 to 80% of my cases don't have first molars. And this leads to worsening of already complex malocclusions by lingual dumping of the molars, mesial tipping of the molars. And now that we don't have the molars in the first case, you know how important molars are for anchorage. Now, we don't have them, so I tend to use a lot of TADs because I don't have much of an option there. And that's one of the reasons why I started putting up a lot of TADs in a lot of cases, because I usually publish what I practice. So that's how it's happened.
That's so interesting. So it's been a clinical need which has led to the advancement of your clinical skill. That's Absolutely. So interesting. That's so interesting. We are, I suppose, we all are to some degree a reflection of our environment, and that's so telling as to how that's happened.
Absolutely.
I'm really interested in your role as a co-editor of the International Orthodontic Journal. I'm going to try saying it again. So, Kieferorthopaedie. I'm going to say it until it eventually makes sense. How did that come about? How did you become the co-editor of such a journal?
Would you believe it if I said I just got lucky? Okay, so I've been working pretty closely with the great Bjorn Ludwig, as you would have probably seen in some of my publications, right? And yes. I'm humbled to say that he appreciated my enthusiasm and eagerness in contributing to the orthodontic clinical literature. As you know, Kieferorthopaedie is a German heritage exclusive orthodontic journal, which has been successfully publishing articles for the past 3 decades. I was lucky that they were looking for an editor for the new section, International Ortho, which was exclusively going to be in English. And since Bjorn Ludwig was the editor-in-chief of Kieferorthopaedie, he suggested my name, and luckily the board accepted it. And here I am calling for papers.
It's amazing. And it's an inspiration to all young orthodontists and people training to become orthodontists, that actually these positions can be achieved by people who are proactive within our field. And it's a fantastic achievement. I congratulate you again for it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I want to move on to some of the work that you've done. There's so much work that you've done indeed, so I've had to kind of really prioritize it. It's been a real difficult one to do. So this week we've got a publication coming out, which should be out by now, as an editorial in the AJODO. I mean, wow, that's just the biggest thing, right? And it's entitled "The Quagmire of Collegiality versus Competitiveness," where you essentially describe the criticizing of colleagues not offering any favor to either the treating clinician, but mainly the patient as well. What led to producing this editorial?
Yeah, thanks, Farooq. Yeah, of course, it's a great achievement getting published in the AJODO. Anyone would love to have something there. It's a special article that's coming out in the AJO. It should be out anytime. And I've co-authored that with the current president of the WFO, Dr. Nikhilesh Ved, and the legend himself, Dr. Jay Bowman. So this was actually a very emotional piece for me. The foundations of this particular article were laid down in my very first year of practice in the clinic that I used to work for previously. I had actually completed my probation period in that clinic, and had later decided not to continue with them because I had some certain management issues with them. Because I left them for another hospital that was a direct competition in terms of patient pool, the same locality and all those things, I didn't go down well with the doctors there, and they started bad-mouthing me in order to convince patients to stay after initial consults with them. Now, this phase for me was very stressful as a very young orthodontist in a foreign country. But then again, as they say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So you survived.
Oh, yeah.
And you've definitely come back stronger, that has to be said. That's so interesting. So again, it's your personal experience that fed into that one. And it's a great piece, guys. So I do recommend you go and look at the AJODO and have a read about this very insightful piece where Adith describes, well, what the motives may well be, but actually what the outcomes are. And I think that's always one to bear in mind in professional dealings. I think we always are very objective in our clinical decision-making, but actually our professional decision-making should also bear in mind the outcomes of our decisions.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to talk about another editorial of yours out in March again. I mean, it's just every week there's something coming from it. It's great. And this kind of interacts with the academic side. And I feel as though you're the right person to ask this question too. I'm so glad you did a piece on this. So this looks like it's entitled "Case Reports: The Obvious Underdogs." And it was in the Kieferorthopaedie journal where you published this. And essentially you give two opposing ideas. about where a case report should stand in our clinical practice. The first is a quotation from Lyle Johnston, where he describes a case report is often an anecdote, and therefore has no more importance than a joke told between two friends in a bar. And you give the second opposing opinion, where you describe a case report has a high sensitivity for detecting novelty and is a cornerstone of medical practice. So with these two opposing ideas, you've got a PhD, you're a co-editor now for a journal. Where do you see case reports standing in orthodontics?
So this is a very interesting question, and I had to use a lot of brains and a lot of research actually to get this editorial done. So you see, a case report provides evidence for effectiveness in a real world setting. Now, what I mean to say is I'm not disregarding controlled trials or analysis, systematic reviews or anything of that sort. They are the best or the highest level of evidence, of course. But what I'm trying to get at here is that a trial, on the other hand, it usually gives us evidence in a controlled setting. Now, what I'm actually getting at is that for a randomized controlled trial, we have a sample size that is screened through a lot of inclusion and exclusion criteria. For example, let's say I want to identify the best location to place TADs in order to retract the anteriors. Now, the results of a trial might say that the best area is between the 5s and the 6. Now, what happens if the 6s are missing? Like I said, 70% of my cases have the 6s missing, right? Yeah. So if ever there was a subject which had a 6 missing in the trial, that would have been excluded from the trial itself. So that's where case studies really come into play. They help us understanding concepts when the sample sizes cannot be gathered, and they give you answers to very specific questions, right? And now, of course, since I write a lot of reports and case series, I also feel that writing about a certain case is like writing about a personal relationship between you and the patient himself or herself. It requires a lot of studying of the underlying evidence, practical skills to actually perform the treatment. And more than anything, it takes a lot to creatively write that, make that a big entire story which does justice to yourself and your patient. And that's exactly why at the end of the editorial, I call case reports a work of art.
Mm-hmm. That is great. And that is great. And I think sometimes the word case report now has got this kind of bad reputation, if I may go that far to say, that it's not that high evidence of science. But I know, I save, by the way, guys, I'm a follower for D, so I will save his posts on social media. And I look back at them and think, wow, that's really good, the way he's used the TAD there. Or I think there was one not too long ago about applying root torque to a canine. Okay. It was great. You used a molar tube upright. Yes. It was just amazing. Like, it's so clever. Now, don't get me wrong, I can't use that on every patient, but it showed a great story, and I loved it, and I thought it was a great post.
At least it gives you an idea of how things can work.
And sticking to the topic of literature and research, Adith, you've published now extensively, but I want to know, what answers do you want to see come out in orthodontics going forward? What are the things that you're looking to see in the next journal that will help you in your practice?
Okay, so before that, let me just tell you one thing that I probably want to tell the listeners here about publishing. It's like, if you've read my editorial in the APOS in the Jan issue. I used to post a lot of stuff on social media, as you said. But then a very senior orthodontist just came up to me and said, "You're wasting time on social media. This hype doesn't last long. And there's no critical appraisal here. There's no peer review. You're just putting across your points." And, well, that was true. And I realized that was absolutely right. And then is when I started to publish, right? So that publications actually put credibility to what you do. And with that, I would like to see many more people publishing the work they do, rather than just going after scientific evidence. That's one thing that I would like to see more in the orthodontic literature. That's number one. Number two is definitely accelerated orthodontic treatment is top on my list, with absolutely no evidence backing any of the claims made by manufacturers of the so-called or accelerating devices or self-ligating brackets, etc. We're yet to find an answer to that question. And until then, the best way to accelerate orthodontic treatment, in my opinion, is not to screw up while performing orthodontic treatment itself.
Yeah, the variable is the clinician making the right decision. Absolutely. I suppose that plays far more than any bracket can ever make an effect.
Very true. And probably another one would be that I would like to see a lot of research done on plastics, because the world of orthodontics is now moving towards aligners. And I would also love to see more evidence in terms of aligners being capable of treating more complex malocclusions. That would give me a lot of confidence in transitioning if I ever would.
That's a great answer. I mean, you've covered both sides of the spectrum. I love the fact, Adith, you haven't sat on one side of the fence and said it's just about RCTs. I think it's so unique to hear somebody saying, actually, I want to see clinical cases. Mm-hmm. I want to see other people treating, because we are such a clinical speciality at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
We can't get away from that. Adith, I want to ask some other quick fire questions at you. So here's one: extraction or non-extraction? Where do you stand?
Depends on the Facebook group I am on. On a serious note, I mean, if I had a borderline case, I would go extracting other than non-extracting. I'm an extraction guy.
Okay, cool. Next one. This is a big one, Adith. I'm not going to. It doesn't need much build-up. Bollywood or Hollywood?
I would say Bollywood. I love Hollywood though, but yeah, Bollywood's my favorite.
Fine. What's your favorite pastime? What do you like to do in your spare time, Adith, if you find any?
Oh, okay. So if I'm not with family, then I would be probably on Facebook looking at Farooq's podcasts or social media posts in the various multitude of orthodontic groups that we have. But if I'm at home, there's actually no time to pass. Between my 2-year-old daughter and a 2.5-year-old beagle, if there is any time left, me and my wife would just love to sleep in peace.
That's completely understandable, having a young one. Adith, you've lived in a few places, and I'm interested to know what's your favourite place that you've lived in? What's the best memories that you have?
You see, once you're learning, probably when you're in your master's or an undergrad, there's not much of responsibilities, and you're there to have fun. So I did love the Philippines and Korea and stuff. But yeah, the place that I love the most is Bangalore. That's a great place, great food, great weather, and after all, it's home.
Okay, amazing. Now switching back on to orthodontics, you've had the good fortune to interact with different types of orthodontists and names. But who is it who you admire the most in orthodontics?
You see, of course, there are these big legends in orthodontics that I've been associated with, like the likes of Dr. Bowman. He's been a constant support. Dr. Ludwig, Dr. Nikhilesh Ved. But then I would like to give this to my orthodontic team. I mean, I would admire my orthodontic team the most in ortho. My resident doctor, Dr. Bunton, and all the assistants that I have. That's exactly the reason why I can present all the cases that I can. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to thank them once again for what they do for me.
Wow. That's such a statesman-like approach. That's a wonderful answer to give, and appreciating that we all stand on the shoulders of other people. And that's so humbling to hear you say.
It's not a one-man show.
And to conclude the interview, Adith, what one piece of advice would you give to all orthodontists out there?
Okay. So I'd put this way. This is how I usually conclude most of my lectures. It's motivational. So I would say this, what you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has a genius, power, and magic in it. Now this holds true for all spectrums. It may be clinical, academics, or just in life in general.
That's great. Thank you so much, Adith, for sharing your time with us, and look forward to seeing your next post, publications, and answering and leading orthodontics going forwards. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Farooq, for having me. It's an absolute pleasure and honor.
Next is an outtake from my interview with Adith. Adith, what do you think has been the success of your social media posts?
Oh, that's a hard one, Farooq. I think it's going to be the podcast you produced on my lecture.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Is that really true, Adith?
Of course not. It was down to the content.
God, Adith, you just built me up and you dropped me down. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of Orthodontics in Interview. Please do subscribe and look forward to the next episode.